welcome. I am Dr. Barry, and here we normally talk about psychology and true crime. Today, we are going to talk about Oprah's recent podcast episode on the rising trend of going no contact with family. I've sometimes covered aspects of going no contact, but this episode brought on s- some interesting perspectives. And I'm pausing because there's one individual that is very triggering for me personally. I will share her picture later. Please do not support her content unless you like it, and that's fine. But for me, we'll get into that a little bit later. And if you have seen the episode, if you know what I'm talking about, you totally understand. And so my goal for today's conversation is um so this was the title of the episode. So the title of Oprah's episode was The Rising Trend of Going No Contact with Family. And on social media, because they specifically targeted, is social media impacting people going no contact? Or is this just a generational shift? Because in prior generations, the idea of cutting a parent off, even if a parent was being extremely harmful, that normally didn't happen. And younger generations are they're they're setting boundaries, and sometimes can no contact go too far? We will have that conversation. It is an extremely complex issue, and so we are just using this from the perspective of how it was presented on the episode. I do have a link to the full episode in the description if you did not watch it. I think there were aspects that were interesting. You all, if you have seen it, if you can put a 1 in the comments if you did see the podcast episode, a 2 in the comments if you did not see the episode. Because that will just be good for me to get an idea of if people have seen it or not. There were multiple experts that were brought in to talk about their books. So one individual, his name, oh wow, and I had it all pulled up, of course. There we go. So the books mentioned in the podcast, and I have them listed in the description. Rules of Estrangement by Dr. Joshua Coleman. And I have not read his book. I'll be completely honest. I have not read that book. Um, and he mentioned the fact that his daughter went no contact with him, and it talks about how they repaired their relationship. And I think that was maybe his second book on the topic, because I think he did another book specifically for parents that had been cut off. And he really talks about how to rebuild connection and rebuild relationships. And the way that he was describing things, to me, it sounded like he was viewing it from a perspective of like the parent trying to not get defensive. So if an adult child goes no contact with their parent, there's normally something that happens before that. And it's not always communicated clearly. But sometimes it is. Sometimes it's a very clear, because different people on the episode talked about why they, as an adult child, went no contact with their parent. There were also parents on the show that had went no contact with their adult children, and then there were also parents where their children were no contact with them. So those different perspectives were all discussed, and no contact can look a little different. Where sometimes what can happen is sometimes a person goes no contact with just the parent, but still maintains contact with their siblings, with aunts and uncles. They still maintain other relationships, but maybe they just go no contact with one individual. I have seen and heard of stories where people go no contact with their entire family. Somebody mentioned being afraid to look at the episode, and I think some aspects of it could be triggering. So please monitor your mental health if you do decide to watch it. I don't know how helpful it was. So anybody that did watch it, I think there were a few I think there were like some nuggets that were given, but there was a lot of just trauma to me. I don't know. There was a lot that was discussed that might not have been as helpful at times. All right, here's a question. Is it mostly children initiating the no contact or more parents going no contact? And um the show, so there's a hashtag, there's a trending hashtag on social media, hashtag no contact. And so if I ever went no contact with a family member, I wouldn't talk about it on social media. So there is a woman where her entire platform, let me go ahead and show her now, because she was the one, and I do not engage with her contact with her content. I have seen other mental health professionals engage with her content, because when you stitch duet, when you share somebody's content, it can make things a little, I don't know, like it can kind of raise their platform. So not Oprah, but the lady, she talks about the fact that her daughter has been no contact with her for 3 years, and she mentions how she has a video pinned where her and her daughter did a video together on her social media, but now her daughter is no contact. And she really tries to make the parents out to be the victims, and that there are good parents that are being cut off for no reason. That is how she frames it. And uh, and and Oprah, I think, because her entire conversation, it seems very self-centered, like me, I. Like, how could she do this to me? I don't know. Like the way she delivers her message is just extremely triggering for me. And one of the parents mentioned, like somebody that went after her mentioned, okay, when the adult children were talking about cutting off their parents, people seem to be shaking their heads and nodding. But then when this lady spoke, people seem to be like, "Ugh." But I think it's a part of how she says things. Like she comes off incredibly entitled at times. She says that she's open to communication, but I don't know if she would respect the boundary of not talking about it on social media, because her entire platform is supporting parents whose children won't talk to them. But ugh, ugh. one of there was one guy on the podcast, a man, he was African American male, that talked about his adult child mentioning to him that he was a helicopter parent. And initially, he was defensive about it, but then he was like, "Yeah, I am always trying to fix her problems. I am definitely a helicopter parent." And he made changes, and they have since repaired their relationship. And I thought that was an interesting point of just how we can have different perspectives, that and at times it can be difficult to hear your child say. So there are people that have went no contact, and it might have been for what they call their own mental health, protecting their peace. And on the show, to me, at times, it's just my own personal thoughts, I think they minimized, like, so if I let my parent know, "I feel like you treat my children different than your other grandchildren," and this is not at all true, so I'm giving a, because some of my family do watch my show, and so, this is not at all a real example. I'm saying in general, if it was the case where my child was being treated different than the other grandchildren and behaviors did not change, and I could see it affecting my child, I would spend less time. I don't know that I would go completely no contact, but if my child, let's say I was married to somebody that was from a different race, or let's say my the my children, my in-laws, let's say there was where my child was being shamed, blamed, criticized, and it's affecting my child's mental health. I am going to protect my child. Do you know what I mean? And they do mention that in the past, people would say, oh, that's just family. Oh, that's just how Aunt so and so is. Or, this is just how this or that is. And in therapy, I have worked with people that, especially teenagers, that if changes did not happen in their family, once they were on their own, they were going to be able to choose whether or not they had a relationship with their parent or not. And relationship is so important. And that was so to me, that theme came out in the episode, that you can't just go off the title. You can't just say, just because I'm your mom, that means I can treat you any old kind of way, or just because I'm your dad, or just because we're family. And even as the child, because there was one example of an adult child that was being verbally aggressive towards the parents, and so the parents, for their own safety, they felt they had been taken advantage of financially, emotionally, that like they needed to cut their adult child off. That just because of that title, that doesn't mean that like you're going to have full access to me, and that you're going to overstep my boundaries. And so I did think that was a positive thing that came out of it. And Oprah was very clear that she wasn't taking a side, because it gives, because I think they intentionally brought controversial people on the show so people would talk about it. Like the fact they had the woman whose picture I just showed, because in the therapy side of things, almost every therapist that has seen that woman's videos on TikTok, it's mostly TikTok, I think. Almost every therapist is like, I can kind of see why your daughter doesn't want to have contact with you. If for some reason my adult son went no contact with me, I would not talk about it on social media as though I was the victim. I personally feel that's problematic. And then also, but I'm also the same person that if I chose to go no contact with a person, I wouldn't talk about that. But that's just me. That's just my personal thing. Um, Now, if I'm setting an example of like, hey, just because we're family, it doesn't mean we have to maintain a relationship. And I might talk generally about a situation. I personally wouldn't talk about that specific person. That's how I navigate things. I see this question. Um, so let me see, how to negotiate a relationship when you might be the only person who's going no contact with a specific relative. And I think that's where so I think a person understanding that their perspective is real and valid, and that sometimes those specific situations have to be discussed individually with your therapist. In general, if there's a family member that I don't feel around, and if I feel for my safe, for my peace, if I need to make that decision for now, I will make that decision. On the episode, they did have a hospice nurse that talked about how some people on their deathbed, they would request that hospice reach out to family members that had gone no contact, to let them know that they were dying. And the hospice nurse felt that it was a control thing, that they were one, and who knows what those individual people's perspectives were. I've heard cases of people on their deathbeds, they did want to apologize for something, or they did want to try to make amends, which, and the victim, like if there is somebody that's a perpetrator and a victim, or somebody that did harm and the other person was harmed, it's up to that to the person that was harmed to decide, do I want to maintain a relationship or not? I thought this was an interesting conversation because I do think certain individuals, so a lot of people follow Colby Ryan, Lori, I want to call her Lori Cox. So Lori's son, a lot of people follow his story, and I completely understand him saying he's never going to have contact with his mother again. Any contact causes so much distress, causes so many issues, probably takes him back in his mind to just a very dark place. And that he's never going to let his children have contact with her. At some point, he will have to explain to his children why he doesn't have a relationship with his mother. And if his kids are like 6 years old, what I personally would say is something to the effect of like, grandma didn't make really good decisions. I don't really have a good relationship with grandma. And that's just like, and that because one of the, I don't know if it was one of the audience members or one of the experts that said, if you model this cutoff culture, will your children do it to you too? Like that was something that was brought up in the episode. And we're speaking in such generalities because people were asking advice from the experts for their specific situations. And I do hope that anybody that was open to any type of therapy, so anybody that agreed to be on the show, and if they did want, therapeutic support, because I mentioned the African American man whose daughter said he was a helicopter parent. Well, he said the thing that really changed things for them was them going to family therapy. And that's important that that the therapist make sure to do like that you can do family therapy with adult children. So I have had adults bring a parent or sibling into therapy before at their request. Sometimes if I'm their individual therapist, sometimes it works better if they get a separate person that just works on the family piece, if that's a large piece of the problem. Um, uh, and so, all right. Um, all right. All right. And let me just make sure. So, do I personally think it's a growing trend? I feel like people are talking about it more. And I think as a society, our view of chosen family. So I hear more people talking about chosen family, especially people in the LGBTQ community. So that was something that didn't come up at all. There were some very important things. So the idea of narcissism did come up. And then also I did want to mention sometimes with narcissist in therapy, you have to make sure the therapist is skilled with narcissism because sometimes the narcissist will weaponize the therapist's words after. So if the therapist says we need to validate one another, the narcissist will hear, I'm always right, and you can't tell me that I'm wrong. Like sometimes, so for somebody that truly is exhibiting very, narcissistic traits, I, as a therapist, never tell somebody to go no contact. Unless I was working, let's say I was working with a 30-year-old woman who was still actively being harmed by their parent. And when I say, I mean like physical, like it's resulting in police, it's resulting in all these things. But I still wouldn't say you should go no contact. I would be like, and Nedra Glover Tawwab. So she has a book, Set Boundaries, Find Peace. She said something to the effect of, what would it look like for you to not have contact for a while with that family member? Because going no contact, it doesn't necessarily have to be forever. Um, uh, and 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 I do think that and I see Jade mentioned that some people feel that it started being talked about on social media and that it possibly gained steam there. But with certain communities, because I've heard people say if there's a grandparent that's making racist comments, if a if a family member is LGBTQ and if they're openly being like targeted, and because one individual mentioned that she was cut off from her family due to not her changing her religious beliefs. I guess her family, it was a disagreement over religion and politics. And so, yes, Oprah does not have any children, biological or adopted. She never got married legally, to my knowledge. Like she never got married. She had a long term partner. I don't know if her and Stedman are still a thing, but that was a thing like a long time ago. But yeah, all right. And then for anybody, sometimes I get comments that sometimes I don't finish my sentences. So for anybody that is bothered by that, you might like my videos a little bit better. So versus my live content, my live videos are edited in a way. No, no, not my live. My regular videos are edited in a way where things might flow a little better for someone if they don't prefer live content. I personally like answering your questions live and really appreciate people asking questions. And so, yes. And so I agree that I think narcissism is being discussed more. And then also, but everything isn't narcissism. So some people, a person can be a jerk and not be narcissistic. And so we talk about narcissism being a spectrum, and that because narcissism, it's a very specific thing, and I never tell a client, I think what you're dealing with is narcissism. And even so, I think it's Lindsay Gibson. Y'all know me in names. I have some of my other videos. I did a video on adult children of emotionally immature parents. She was on the show and she talked about her book. And she mentioned that she never tells a client, I think your parent is emotionally immature. As a therapist, you ask questions. Self-help books are great for general things, but if people are needing individualized help and support, that's where finding a therapist that is skilled in whatever is going on, I think that can be more helpful. And then I like how somebody mentioned that sometimes you can limit contact. You can maybe look at what types of contact, because maybe I just text this person. And then when we talked about our Thanksgiving episode, that there are also times where people can say, if I do go to visit, I'm going to get my own hotel room. I'm going to make sure that I'm protecting myself in the midst of this. And that there are ways that we can show support, that we can make sure that we are protecting ourselves in the midst of this. Now, I will say that sometimes perceptions can be different. So I've worked with adult parents that are trying to reconcile with their children. And the adult parent might be very harmed, like they might be really upset that their child cut them off. And I asked them to put that aside for a minute to be curious about what's going on with their child. Because the empathy came up in the episode, and one of the experts, Nedra, mentioned that a part of healing might be that I don't expect mothering from the person that birthed me. And that can be really hard, because there was a woman on the show who she told her story. She mentioned that she was abandoned by her mother at 6 years old. And then when she reconnected with her mother for her college graduation, her mother ruined it, and it was this horrible thing. And her question was about forgiveness. And I have an entire episode only on forgiveness, but Nedra mentioned, if you are going to have some type of contact with the individual, not expecting it to be mothering, that that you might not be able to get like that that nurturing, that's not going to come from that person. In EMDR, there is an attachment script. So for people that don't have a solid 3-year, because that initial nurturance is very important. And I've worked with people that were born into very neglectful situations immediately, maybe even in utero, like even what they experienced a lot of trauma and they don't have a concept of what a good mother even looks like. And so within eye movement desensitization reprocessing, the way that I was trained, there is something called an attachment script where we sit down and we write out what would a good mother, what would you expect from that parent throughout these different parts of your life, and having a person create that visual image for themselves, that for some people, before we start doing some of the processing, some of the deeper work, if they don't have a good image, a good foundation of what a typical mother should do, it can be really hard for them to break some of those ingrained patterns of why wasn't I lovable? Why wasn't I good enough? Why wasn't I this? When it's like, wait a minute. So so this is Dr. Berry speaking. I have an 8-year-old. I would never leave my child for anybody else. There is nothing I would not do, within reason for my child. And with and then there are other people that put themselves first, and they don't like their children. They hate their children. And I, as a therapist, if I am working with a parent that hates, despises their children, that is something that I really have to work on. Like, I have to really learn more about their story, learn more about their childhood, try to get an idea of what's going on, because with certain situations, I've worked with, often that individual has a lot of work that we have to do as we kind of move along. But uh the next episode that we'll be doing a little bit later today, if you want to hang out with us for the Sandra Vander Ark. So that's what I'm going to be talking about next. Sandra Vander Ark, she is requesting a new trial. That is a pretty heavy case. I'm not going to go into a lot of the details specifics, but that's what we're going to do next. Probably about 1:35. I'll probably be about 5 minutes late for that one. So did you say in utero? What would that look like? So there are some people that know that, sometimes their parent has told them that they hated the fact that they were born, or like the child, maybe the parent used substances while during the pregnancy. The child was not appropriately nurtured or maybe the mother was extremely sick. So like there's some parents that have very difficult pregnancies, and the child is aware that their pregnancy, like when the parent was pregnant with them, they really weren't wanted. And so in that attachment script, sometimes we have to go back to, um, what would somebody that was excited about having a child, what would they do when they found out they were pregnant? So I can tell you, for me, and my child was not planned. He wasn't not like I wasn't on contra like he wasn't not planned, but he wasn't planned. And the minute I found out, I went to Walmart and bought a onesie. Like, I was so excited. I started changing what I ate. I was very aware of my health, and so I didn't drink. I did all the things that you're supposed to, but not quite all, because I did drink I did drink coffee. I needed coffee to make it through. And my child might overhear me saying that I felt sick So I had all day nausea for my second and third trimester. My first trimester, I didn't feel pregnant at all. I actually took pregnancy. I probably took like 5 or 6 pregnancy tests because I had no symptoms until the second and third trimester is when I felt sick. And my labor was extremely hard. And so if for some there might be a part of the story my son has heard that he might think he caused me pain or something. I don't know. So if he with his therapist, if they were ever having um sometimes the therapist does some work if a person has negative thoughts uh regarding their early development. So from the time the parent found out they were pregnant, from the time they were conceived, all the way to around 3, 4 years old. So having a positive image for that with EMDR, they found that that can be helpful with later processing. I hope that was helpful. Yeah. And so Law Junkie, I see your comment um, uh, and that's where when I'm working with clients that have been told that, you know, you made me sick or like that. So I've also worked with some kids that were adopted, and they knew that the part of the reason why they were adopted was because their parent was the victim of a crime, or and so for a lot of people that can put in their brain, there's something wrong with me. There can be some schemas that are set. And if it happened to somebody else, we would say, like, "It wasn't your fault. That had nothing to do with you." Like, you would say something completely different, and so, yes, yes, yes. Alright. Yeah, it is a really, really difficult topic, and, we are going to shift a little bit later. If people want to dive deeper into any of my other content on these topics, I do have a book review of The Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. I also have the book review of Set Boundaries, Find Peace. That is one of my favorite boundary books ever. It was so helpful. She also has a new book that'll be coming out. It's called, and I get nothing for saying this. I'm just a fan. It's called The Balancing Act: Creating Healthy Dependency and Connection Without Losing Yourself. Because often finding that balance between not giving too much, not holding back, not losing yourself in the midst of relationships, that can be hard. And so she talks about how to create healthy dependency and unpacking some buzzwords like codependency, attachment styles, inner family systems, and more. And so I will definitely be checking out that audiobook. I think the audiobook comes out sometime next year. I think I've already pre-ordered it. I'm almost positive I've already pre-ordered it. I love an audiobook, and that's what I'll be doing. I so appreciate you all. Thank you all so much for joining. If there are parents that are looking to parent differently, I do have a book. I'm sorry, I do have a video on breaking generational trauma. So, and often parents do the best they can with the skills and tools and resources that they have. The problem can come when their best isn't enough. And so if that parent's childhood was extremely traumatic and then they've passed that trauma on to their child, to me, I want to help everybody heal. Like that's always my goal. If we can heal, we can stop passing on this pain and start, creating a better future. And so I will see you all in the next one. Once again, we will be talking about Shonda Vander Ark. If you want to check out one of the other videos, feel free. I will see y'all in the next one. Have a good one.